Hi everyone, Shona here with another installment of my devlog. Over the last couple of weeks I have been focused primarily on rearranging the way a lot of stuff works behind the scenes. A large part of that is getting it ready for eventually opening it up to modders once the game's released, and the rest of it is about just making it easier for me to make changes on the fly once the game's released that won't require needing to recompile the entire game. The upshot of this is that after 2 weeks hard work, everything looks and works just like it did before, which somehow doesn't feel like progress even though intellectually I know it is. So there isn't really anything new for me to show you in terms of game mechanics or anything, so instead, this episode I'm just going to give a brief overview of what I've done and why. The first thing to talk about is the way that I'm dealing with images now. Images primarily are the sort of assets that will be useful to be able to change on the fly. Now, Unity has 3 ways that it deals with these sort of assets. The first and most basic is just sticking it somewhere under this main assets folder. Now, the thing with that, and which can be really useful, is that if you're not actually using the particular asset through the Unity interface, so to give an example of that, let's say here's the deconstruct button, and you can see here that I have the source image set to this button text gold. That file lives under here. Alright, there it is. But you'll see there's also a lot of other buttons in other colours. Now, Unity's smart enough to know I'm not calling on most of those, and so when it bundles everything together to make it into a game that can be installed and run on anybody's computer, it won't bother including things like button text blue, button text brown, button text grey, because they're just not being used. So this can be useful for things like these sort of assets. It means that you can keep things in your folder to use when you need them, but you're not going to blow up the size of your eventual game just so that you can have them on hand. Similarly here, I have this folder. This is 5 gigabytes worth of sound files that I bought on sale a while ago. I'm probably going to use maybe 2%, 3% of the files in this folder, but I'm happy to leave them all sitting here because I know that the ones I don't use just won't ever actually turn up in the game. Where this becomes a problem is where you want to bring assets in programmatically. For example, if you have a look when the game runs, alright, so you've got the little characters here. They don't actually exist until the game starts running, and they're created in code. They're not created in the same way that, say, that deconstruct button was. And so you need a way to tell Unity, I know you can't actually find an object with this graphic on it, but please include it anyway because the graphic's still needed. The second way to do that is to have a folder called Resources and to put it under there. Anything that is in Resources, whether Unity knows that you're using it or not, will get included in the final exported game. The downside is the way that Unity deals with resources is that it bundles them all together into a single file, which makes it really hard for anyone else to come along and see what those files are, change them, add to them, whatever. Sometimes this is a feature, say for example if you have things that you don't necessarily want to expose to your game's players. Sometimes, as in the case of things that you want your players to be able to mod, this is, I won't call it a bug, but it's definitely not a desired feature. What I learned recently was that there's a third way, which is to have a folder called Streaming Assets and to put things under there. And like with resources, Unity will include everything under Streaming Assets whether it knows you're using it or not. Unlike with resources, it will just drop the Streaming Assets folder into your game's install, and all of your subfolders and files will just be sitting there on the player's system. This makes it ideal as the place where moddable resources can go, because it means that any player can just drop their own folder of changes into here, and if you've got your code set up to read it correctly, then you can incorporate those changes into the game. I'll go into that in more detail further down the track when I've built out the modding system a bit more, but the point is we now have it set up so that this will just be able to happen later. It won't be a problem to integrate. The other thing that I was doing was, now that I know a bit more about what the shape of my code looks like, how I'm organising things, where things live, how they relate to each other, rather than having things like the buildables, which are the things that appear in this menu down here, hard-coded, they're now in their own file. The game just reads that file in when it runs and knows how to build the menu from that. It knows all of the details about what those things do when you build them. So, for example, we had the mining station, which goes away, and there we go, they go and use that. Now, for the actual using of it, I've pulled a lot of that code out as well and put it into a Lua script. Now, Lua is a language that's kind of become a bit of a de facto standard for game modding. Not entirely certain why, although probably the fact that I believe World of Warcraft was one of the early adopters of it probably helped. But the important thing is, it is what's called a scripting language, which means that rather than needing to be pre-compiled and set up in such a way that it runs, it can just be run at the time of the game needing it. And so the other thing that I've spent a lot of time doing in the past 2 weeks is figuring out how to translate a lot of my C# code into Lua Script, which is kind of similar and kind of not, and in a lot of cases it's just different enough to keep tripping me up. The big one being that, unlike in C# where you can just go if this, make that happen, else, now you need to say if then. And the number of times I have been scratching my head as to why something won't work, and it turns out it's because I forgot to write then after the if statement. I don't even know anymore. But the important thing is, I now have enough different things done that it should be a fairly good template for further on as I build out more structures, more workbenches, to be developing their functionality in Lua, and that then also opens it up to further down the track. For example, modders will be able to change how existing workbenches work, or create their own workbenches and provide both graphics and functionality for them. And that's kind of exciting because I'm a big fan of moddable games. I don't do a whole heap of modding myself, but I am a huge consumer of other people's mods. I can't think of any moddable game that I play without a whole heap of mods installed. So I suppose that's largely why I wanted to make sure that my game was able to support that right out of the gate. It's also really good for creating a community around a game. If you have a game that supports modding, that gets a lot of people's interest because there are people out there who actually enjoy modding more than they enjoy playing. So, provide something for them too. And also just because I'm one person, I can't think of everything. I certainly can't code everything just because I'm one person and there aren't that many hours in a day. So this will give the ability for other people to say, like I've done, this is a really good game, but what it's missing is... and then provide the thing they think is missing. And there's a fairly good chance that other people will enjoy playing with that thing that they thought was missing as well. And I just like seeing the creative takes that people can take and bring to a game. So that's been the last couple of weeks, and my next task that I'm just starting on is creating a selection system so that in future, as well as just having this little mouse over, let's give a bit of basic information about what you're passing the cursor over, you'll be able to click on a character or a workbench or an item and get some more information about it, perhaps get some extra functions that you can perform on it, and all of that sort of thing. That will then provide a stepping stone to actually being able to incorporate extra functionality into a lot of things, because there'll be an interface to hang it off. Hopefully by next episode I'll be able to show that off to you. I think that's it for this week, so I will sign off and see you all again next week. Take care, everyone. Bye.